Hello, this is a short video explaining the functions of Eclipse with particular emphasis on the managerial and senior practitioner functions. As you know from your e-learning, Eclipse is laid out very similarly to Care First. You'll see across the top you have the main bar, which includes the search bar, the profiles that you can pick, your personal change password function, and of course the logout button with of course your own profile or the client you're looking at here. And then down the left hand side in black, you have the main menu, which only shows a couple of tabs at the moment. But once we go into a person record, you will see that it expands to show many more pages. And this is how you will navigate through Eclipse, whilst the main body of the screen is taken up by whatever page you happen to be looking at. So we'll just start by going over some very basic functions. When you first log on, you are taken to the home screen, as you can see here highlighted in blue. As you can see here, my worker name and my unique worker ID in brackets. Since in Eclipse, both workers and clients will have a person ID, which is a number with PER in front of it to replace Care First ID numbers. So this is the home screen that you will see when you first log on. You'll see it as a total of my summary showing work that is currently overdue or on time for different clients. And you will see how it's broken down by your tasks and your team's tasks. You'll also notice that since we are focusing on managers and senior practitioners, I've got my profile set to Brum Adults Team ASC Manager Practitioner. Brum Adults Team is a temporary placeholder for the various constituency teams that we've just designed to help us test Eclipse prior to go live. So as a manager or senior practitioner, you would have access to several different profiles. I personally have access to many random profiles with many different teams because as an Eclipse officer, I need to switch between different roles to test various functions in Eclipse. However, post go live, you will not have nearly as many as this. Most managers will perhaps only have one or two different profiles for the team in which they are under. For example, as you can see in Brum Adults Team, I have the manager role, which I'm currently on, but I also have a worker role and a super user role to allow me to perform data quality changes. Also, next to that is my main account settings where I can change the password or the notification settings. You'll notice there are several blue buttons on the top right side, and I'll just demonstrate this. At the moment, it's currently on work lists, showing what work lists are currently overdue or on time. The first button is authorization. Only people on a manager profile here will be able to see this button. This is unique to manager profiles, and this is how managers and people with relevant access will authorize the various work that as it is completed by social workers. So if we click on that button, you will now see that you've been taken to the requests awaiting authorization page. This page is where any work that needs to be authorized by a manager in order for it to be completed will be automatically sent by Eclipse. So when a worker completes a work list up to the point they can complete it, they will submit it for authorization, and then that work list will sit on that client's record pending authorization. When it is submitted, it will be sent automatically to this request awaiting authorization list, depending on what team they're in. For example, a Selly Oak worker, it would go to the Selly Oak awaiting authorization list. But since this is just a placeholder for Brum Adults Team, any worker under Brum Adults Team will have their work sent here for authorization. But we'll come back to this later when I demonstrate how it works with regards to authorizing work. So instead, now we go over to allocation. This currently shows various clients that are allocated to yourself, as well as work that is allocated to your team, the team you're currently manager of, as well as various work allocated to your colleagues, and finally, your recently accessed clients. And you can see there who have recently accessed and when they were accessed. So this just shows you your current allocation and the allocation of your colleagues and team. It's also from this allocation page that you could add a person by clicking the Add Person button, as occasionally you may have to add a person. The reason you may have to add a person, while the majority of new clients will be added via the contact center, they will come in and the contact center workers will do an initial contact, and if they deem it necessary, a conversation one or safeguarding as needed will be created. It may be that occasionally you have to create a record yourself. The reason for this is, unlike in Care First, Eclipse does not allow text-only records. What this means is, in essential, if you wanted to create a relationship between two people, both of those people must have their own Eclipse profile. For example, if I was working as a social worker, if I was working with, say, an elderly female client, and I wanted to add her husband as the husband relationship, I could only do so if the husband himself had a profile on Eclipse, even if he himself is not a client and receives no services from BCC in any capacity. He would need to have a bare bones basic profile, and this is the window from which you would do it. You would just add the very basic information and then create a profile for that person. Once both he and his wife exist on Eclipse, you can then create the relevant relationships. But we won't do that for now. That's not part of this video, so we'll just come out of that. So that's the allocation screen, showing both the work allocated to you, your team and your colleagues, as well as the place from where you can add a person. And then finally, the last of the blue buttons, we have dashboard. Again, this dashboard, along with authorization, is something only people on a manager's profile can see. You will see from this interactive dashboard that this is how you can have a quick glance to see the current layout of work being completed in your team. So for example, here as a manager of Brum Adults team, I can see a certain number of reviews which have not been started, a certain number of initial contacts within the time scale, a certain number of conversations threes and support plans all within time scale. I can see the safeguarding activities. I can see there's one safeguarding inquiry which is outside of its time scale, so it's overdue, and again concerns inside of time scale. And I scroll down, I can see goals, if there were any, and I can see delayed transfer of care, why it's been delayed. And again, you'll see there's just the one example at the moment, health cause. And I continue to scroll down, and we have a breakdown of reported health conditions. And you'll see, as I move my mouse over it, it's very interactive. And of course, funding source. And you can see, based on all the work that has been done by all the workers in the team you are manager of, Eclipse will calculate look at all the forms that have been completed to show and break down the various funding sources. So because all of us Eclipse officers have been working on Brum Adults team testing forms, we've been closing and opening quite a few forms. So you'll see there's quite a few different types of funding sources because we've been testing them all. But obviously, post go live, this will limit itself only to the team you're on. So this dashboard function allows you to have a quick overview of the work that is being done by the workers in your team, with regards to what's late or what's overdue, as well as a breakdown of certain specific information you may find relevant. And it's all highly interactive, and you can remove certain things or focus in on just to look at specific information and move to that particular client as necessary. So you can have a look and go right into the information just by clicking on each one. So if I wanted to look at those that were being, for example, self-funded, I could simply click on that, and then I have a full list of all the fake clients that have self-funded as their funding source, and I can just click on their name to move instantly to that client record. This allows for a real deep dive of information of the work that's been conducted by my team. And of course, you can also filter it if you want to look at an overview of work, perhaps for a specific time period. So this is hopefully very useful for managers and senior practitioners to get a real understanding of where their team currently is with regards to their work. So that's the four main buttons you see on your home screen. I will now show you as a manager how to allocate work. So obviously as a manager, you will be allocating work on a regular basis. But first, we will need to open up a client record to use as an example. So I have created a new fake client for this, just for this purpose. I search within the search box and click enter, and now you'll see we are now taken from the home screen and instead put into a person screen. And you'll also notice that the left hand menu has now populated itself with many different tabs that did not exist before. And this is because we're now in a client record, as you can see here. And you'll see it's taken us to the person details screen, which is the first screen that you'll see when you first go into a client record. So to allocate work as a manager, once you've opened a person record, you simply first go to relationships. And this takes you to the relationship page for this client. Now, obviously, since I've just created this client brand new, there are no current relationships. However, obviously, before the go live date, data will be migrated over from a Care First to Eclipse. So any relationships that exist on Care First will become part of Eclipse and stored here in relationships. But for now, we don't need to worry about pre-existing relationships because we're going to create a new one instead. So you go to relationships and you will need to add a professional relationship allocated worker. So you select the worker that you're going to have as the allocated worker for this client. To do that, you simply on the relationships page, go across to these blue buttons here and click the last one, add. This gives you the option to add a relationship for this person. We'll then present you with 5 options: familial, social, professional, organizational, and team. For the purpose of allocating an allocated worker, we're going to click professional. And then we click the green proceed button. And it says you are adding a professional relationship for Freddie. And so who is this relationship to? With a box, which is mandatory, as you can see by the asterisk. This is where you'll enter the name of the worker you are about to make the allocated worker for this client. So I'll use myself as an example. And I'll say that I am. And it says, what is Jordan's relationship to Freddie? And I will say that I am a social worker. You see, you have many professional options, but I'll say I am a social worker. And when did it start? You can enter the date or use the blue calendar button to do the calendar, or you can just double click inside to put today. And I'll say it started today. I'm making Jordan the allocated worker today. So the main relationship is now a social worker. However, one difference that Eclipse shows is the inclusion of attribute features on relationships. This allows you to add extra depth to a relationship by showing different attributes that exist within the same relationship. For example, the main relationship is now social worker. Jordan is a social worker to Freddie. However, by scrolling down, you can see there are also different attribute features that I can add. So as well as being the social worker, he can be the allocated worker, the financial representative, a key holder, emergency contact, court-appointed deputy, etc., etc. You'll see there are several professional attribute features. The most important one is allocated worker. This is the one we're using now. And as a manager, this is how you will denote allocated workers. So I will simply tick on that underneath my name next to allocated worker, and then I click save. You will now see that a relationship has been created for myself. Obviously, in real life, you would do it for your workers, but I'm just using myself as an example. So now a relationship exists. I am a social worker under the Brum Adults team, and I am also, as you can see by this AW, allocated worker. You will also notice that now this box here in the top bar has filled in allocated to. So now you can see just by looking at this top bar that this client, Freddie, is allocated to Jordan, the social care worker. And you can press that little arrow just below the client's name to expand it, and you can see my work email is there. So you can just click on that to send an email directly to the allocated worker for a client. This will also send a notification to the worker in question if they have their notification settings set up, which will be set up after go live, informing that particular worker that you, the manager, have allocated said client to them, and they are now the allocated worker. So after you've done the allocated worker relationship, you will now go to case notes. Case notes are the Eclipse equivalent of observations, and any observations that exist on Care First will be migrated over and transformed into case notes. So once you've done the professional relationship, you will now need to add a case note showing that you have allocated work to the worker, as it were. So you click on Add, and then you are given a case note window. And again, you put the entry date. You can do it manually, or you can just select current date or select current date and time. I'll click that just to fill it in for me. And then we have different entry types, which are compulsory again, as denoted by the asterisk. So I'll click on entry type, and you'll see there are many different types. And I'll scroll down to the one I want, which is managers' comments/decisions. So I'll click on that. And then beneath that, you have the main body of text, which is also compulsory. This is where you will enter the main information that you need. So for example, I will just type in a certain brief piece of information. So for example, this particular client, Freddie, has been allocated to a worker, Jordan, on today's date. And then you'll put in all the relevant information that you need to. Obviously, this is just a brief example. So under manager's comments, you would put in the client, the worker you've made, the allocated worker, and the date that you've done it. And then you would simply click save. And just as easily as that, a case note has now been added. And you can see that it was added, and that on this particular date, this client was given an allocated worker of Jordan. So that is how you will first set up the allocation. You will go to relationships and create an allocated worker, and then go to case notes and create a quick manager's comments case note showing and explaining that you have allocated this client to the particular worker on a particular date. So once you've set up like that, you can begin the task of reassigning work lists to workers. For example, if a worker was off sick or just generally needed to have work allocated to them. So this is the work list will appear on the work lists page, and it is from here where work list will be visually shown. As you know, in Eclipse, forms exist within work lists. You cannot add a form on its own. You must add a work list. This ensures that the work is segmented and broken down easily. Each work list contains its own form, and the work list is named after the form it contains. So just for the purposes of demonstration, I will quickly add a simple work list. And to do that, you simply go on to add, and you can see all the different work lists here. But I will simply filter it to show a conversation one. And I'll click add. Yes. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we imagine that an initial contact has been completed and the contact center worker has decided to create a conversation one. When they close down their initial contact work list, depending on what they've picked, the subsequent work list will be automatically generated. In this case, the contact center worker will have decided to do a conversation one is needed, and then when they close down the initial contact, a conversation 1 and 2 will automatically be generated and sent to the relevant team. So for the purposes of this demonstration, we'll pretend that this conversation 1 and 2 is that one that was automatically generated. Now, imagining that I need to reallocate a work list to a different worker. To do so, you'll see that it's currently under my name anyway because I just created it. However, imagining that I needed to reallocate it to a different worker, I could simply click to reallocate it. I simply go across here to the Actions Select Blue button, and I have several options, and I have pick the middle option, which is Reassign Work List. And I'm given an option of reassigning the conversation 1 and 2. You see, it's a type of owner, individual owner. It's automatically assigned to myself. However, I can assign it to another person. So I click on Assign to another person, and then I can simply enter the name of the worker I wish to reassign this particular piece of work to. So, for example, I'll just pick one of my colleagues, and just as simply as that, Eclipse will pick the relevant person from the information you enter. So I do that. And then once you've picked a worker, you need to make sure you're selecting the worker under the right team profile. As I mentioned previously, some workers may have more than one profile. Again, most workers will not have this many profiles. Since Mara is one of my Eclipse colleagues, we have many profiles. So I will just pick the Brum Adults team as the placeholder and then click Save. Now you'll see that the work list has been successfully reassigned, but before it was assigned to me, since I was the one that created it, it has now been reassigned to Mara, and a notification will go to her explaining that I, as a manager, have now reassigned this particular work list, in this case a conversation 1 and 2, under Freddie, to her, and she is now responsible for this particular work list. So this is how you will reassign work lists. Obviously, I allocated myself as an allocated worker, merely as an example. But if this was a different person, I would allocate the client to that person, for example, Mara. Then I would make a case note explaining that I had done so. And finally, I would reallocate some pre-existing work lists that had been created or taken from another worker and then reallocate them to the person I just made the allocated worker. So that is how you create an allocated worker and reassign work lists. Obviously, as a manager or someone with managerial access, you will obviously be needing to assign work as it comes in, and also for example, if workers go off sick or work needs to be reallocated. And again, to do that, it's as simple as just clicking the select button on the work lists you want to and reassigning them, and you can move them as needed, which will send an automatic notification to the person. So that is how you create an allocated worker and can move work lists to different workers for them to fill out. I will now show you how to authorize work, which obviously will form part of a very large part of your day job. To do that, I will simply create another work list. So imagining now that I have worked through this person, Freddie, and I have reached the end, and a package of care has been set up, or it's decided they do not need a package of care, and they have been signposted to assistance within the community. Either way, then, I will have to undertake an end allocation or closed case work list to show that I am no longer needing to be the allocated worker because the work has come to an end. This will be created or triggered as needed, but I've just manually added it now for the purposes of demonstration. So I will just reassign this to Mara as an example again, imagining that she's the worker. And I'll simply go in to the work list, pretending now to be Mara, and I will see that I have 3 tasks, and I will simply complete the task. So I will go into the first task, add the end involvement form. The first task is usually always add the form itself into the work list because work lists are created empty. You have to manually enter and add the form into the work list. It's just an empty receptacle initially. So the first task is always add the form. So I click the green add form button. And I'm asked to choose a subtype. I'll skip that for now. We'll come back to that later. And my form now pops up in a separate window. As you'll remember from your training, Eclipse forms pop up in separate windows. This allows you to have more than one form open simultaneously without having to block yourself from using the rest of Eclipse. And you can even have multiple forms open from different clients if needed. So now that I've opened this particular form, I, pretending to be Mara as another worker, will click on and fill out this one little section. I'll click edit. And it asks me to choose what I want, end allocation or close case, and I'll decide that I wish to end allocation. For example, perhaps it's gone into A package of care was created and it's gone into the review system for 12 months. So no further work needs to be undertaken. So I'll click end allocation and then save next. And then that produces the end allocation section because that is what I selected above. And it says, complete all forms, work lists and case notes you're responsible for. Ensure data quality items are up to date. For example, address, relationships, classifications, warnings, and alerts. So, and then you have one last thing to enter, which is your worker involvement summary. So I'll just say package of care created, entered into review system. But obviously in real life, the worker would put in as much or as little information as they felt was necessary. And there's also a little blue guidance button to remind you that this will create an automatic case note entry. And so I simply click save and next. And just like that, that's done. So that's what a worker will do when they want to either end allocation or close a case. And I will now click exit and submit. You'll remember from your training that for forms that do not require authorization, such as a Con 1 or Con 2, this will be an exit and complete button, which will close down the work list and trigger off the next work list that you selected. However, for forms that do require authorization, such as reviews and this particular end allocation / close case work list, clicking this exit and submit button is what will send this work list to the awaiting authorization list I showed you earlier on. So I shall click exit and submit. Yes, I want to exit and submit. And it asks me to choose a subtype. You'll remember I skipped this, but you can't skip it now. It's always best to skip the creation of a subtype until the end, until you've completed a form. A subtype is simply a slight name change to a form. It in no way changes the internal contents of the form or the information you have created. It simply changes the name slightly to reflect what exactly you've been done. So, for example, there are two options in this. The form can be either an end allocation or a closed case. It can't be both at the same time. But you'll remember I chose end allocation, so I'll click that and then just click submit. And you'll now see that it's become an end involvement or closed case work list, but now you see it's specified itself as an end allocation. So returning to my work list page for Freddie, you'll see now that the end allocation or closed case work list is 67% complete. This is because there were 3 tasks in the work list. You'll remember the first task was the adding of the form. The second task was the completing and submitting of the form. The third task is the authorization of the form, which obviously only a manager or a senior practitioner or someone with that level of access can do. So now that it's been submitted, it has been automatically sent to the awaiting authorization. So obviously, as a worker, Amara would not be able to authorize her own work unless she had self-authorization access. So instead, as a manager, it's been sent automatically to me. So as a manager, I will then log on to Eclipse and I will click on my authorization request button on my home page. You remember I showed you this at the beginning of the session. So hopefully, you see now at the very top of my list with my clients that I just created is now the work list I just this second filled out pretending to be a social worker. And you'll see it's automatically been sent here. And you'll see there's also different ones done from different workers, all under the Brum Adults team. So any worker under the team of which you are a manager, their work lists, once submitted for authorization, will automatically be sent here, and they will remain on this list until you authorize them. To authorize them, it's as simple as clicking on the name of the work list itself, in this case the end allocation one. This will bring up a locked version of the work list that has been filled out by the worker. Obviously, I just filled this out myself, but pretending that as a manager, I would not have seen this yet. So, and then I will go through the work list. Obviously, an end allocation work list is very small, consisting of just 2 sections, whereas things like reviews and support plans would, of course, be much larger. So as a manager, I would then look through all the information that was added, and I would see if I was happy with the information that they'd filled out. in this case, I was happy that there were end allocation because the work had been completed. And I have two options, exit or exit and authorize. Exiting merely closes down the form. You'll see it's still here at the top. However, exit and authorize is what will automatically close the form down and then send a signal back to the work list that is currently sitting there 2/3 complete, and will then automatically complete that work list. If it were a work list that triggered off other work lists, for example, a support plan, once closed, would automatically trigger a review of that support plan, then that work list will be automatically generated only once the work list have been completely authorized. For example, a new work list will not be created even if you select that you want to create another work list from the one you're on. For example, if you're filling out a support plan as a worker, and the worker has stipulated they want a review after the support plan, obviously before it goes into the review system, even though they stipulated that, the review will not appear until you, as the manager, have authorized the support plan work list, however long that takes. Once you do authorize it, the support plan will close down, and then the review work list will appear in its place, since that's what the worker selected. And then we click exit and authorize to do so. So I'll click now exit and authorize on the end allocation. Click yes, I want to authorize it. And here is where I have authorization comments. So now I will select the various comments that I want to put in. For example, in this case, I am happy to authorize this particular form. So I will now do so. Obviously, as a manager, you will put in the various comments that you wanted to enter when you're authorizing it. So I'll just put that as a placeholder and then click the green authorize button. And you will now see that the form says form successfully authorized, and you'll see it's now vanished from my list, because it's now been sent back to the work list for the person, and it's been completed. So if I return to the worker, the client I was on, you'll see now that the end allocation for Freddie has vanished because it has been completed. You see, if I take off the filter, you'll see now end allocation closed case is now 100% completed because I authorized it. Obviously, this is true for any work list that requires authorization. Students and workers that are on a support performance plan will be required to send their conversation threes to supervisors, managers, for authorization before a support plan and accompanying budget application work list can be triggered. Whereas for normal workers, we're looking at changing this to allow them to automatically create a support plan from a conversation 3 without it needing to be authorized. But for students and workers on a support performance plan, they will still need to have their conversation 3 authorized before a support plan work list will be created. So that is how you can accept and authorize a work list. Obviously, as a manager, you also have the ability to reject work list if you deem that perhaps a worker has missed out some essential information or the circumstances have changed. Obviously, in your own professional capacity, you can reject a work list, and doing so will send it back to the worker, and obviously your comments will then dictate what needs to be done. For example, I will just use my colleague Thomas's example, support plan and review, and I would imagine that I will click into this as a manager, which again will bring up a locked version of the support plan that my colleague completed. So again, I would look through all the various sections, and I would look to see that I was happy with all of these sections, and I was happy to look at all the information. However, we'll imagine that I have seen something that I'm not happy with. Perhaps a certain piece of critical information is being missing out, or there is not enough information in a certain section. So I will come out of it, not exit and authorize, since that will authorize it. I will instead just exit the form and come out of it. Then, if I wish to reject it, for example, I can now go across to the Actions blue select button on this particular work list, click select. I have And I have three options. Viewing it will simply open the form again. Authorize is simply the process we just did, but this allows you to authorize it without having to look at it. And then you have the reject function. So having looked at the form and I wish to reject and not authorize it, I click reject, and I now have rejection comments. So I can just type anything I want. Though, as a manager, obviously you would need to explain in detail why you are rejecting the authorization request for this particular support plan and what the worker would need to do in order to get it authorized. But I'll just put rejection example just as a placeholder here. Obviously, it's up to you how little or much information you put in this box. And then I click the green reject button. And now you'll see that it's vanished from the top because it's been either authorized or in this case rejected. So once one of those two options is picked, it vanishes from your list. This is now sent back to my colleague Thomas a note saying that this particular work list has been rejected. And obviously the worker will view your rejection comments, and from there they will make the necessary amendments to the work list by going into the client and going into that work list via the work list page. They will then make all the necessary adjustments and tweaks to the work list and then submit it again, whereupon it will appear again in your requests awaiting authorization list. And from there you can view it again, and if you are happy that they have made the changes you require, you can then authorize it. So that is how you can both authorize and reject any work done by anyone in your team. Obviously, the list will grow to include all the work that is added as it's submitted by workers, and you can expand to show up to 100 rows per page. So you can see just from me and my various colleagues that we've been testing out various forms and submitting them. So obviously this form is a living form, and it will add and it will grow and shrink as workers submit forms for authorization and you authorize them in turn. So this will change every day as needed. As it was an end allocation work list that we just did, because the worker is no longer the allocated worker. Now, as the manager, we will manually end the worker relationship via the relationship menu. So we will again go to the relationships, and you'll remember that I made myself the allocated worker for Freddie earlier on in this video. We will pretend now that the work has all been done and that I submitted the various work, the end allocation, etc., etc., and that I, as a manager, not just as a worker, have now accepted and authorised the end allocation. So now that Freddie is now going to be put into the review system for 12 months. So I'll now simply end the allocated worker relationship by going into actions, selecting end relationship. I shall put today's date. And I'll just have three options: entered in error, person died, or relationship ended. I'll pick relationship ended, as this is just a normal one to do. And then I'll click yes. And now you see I've ended the relationship, and although it still says allocated worker here on the actual relationship page, you'll now notice that it has vanished from the top bar. There is no current allocated worker. This only shows current allocated worker. Any allocated workers that have an end date obviously are not current and therefore will not be seen here. And so that is the overall process of how you would allocate a worker to a client, along with adding a case note. Then you would reassign various work lists to them, perhaps, for example, those that come in from the contact centre, as well as work lists that are currently being held by other workers if they were going off on sick leave or there needed to be a shift in the workload. And then also a demonstration of how you, from your home screen as a manager, would authorise work as it came in, as well as being able to view work that was being completed via the dashboard. And then once you have authorised the work and the particular worker is no longer working on a case, or you wish to end allocation, it's as simple as going into the person's relationships and ending that particular allocated worker relationship, which then removes it from the main top bar. So that was a short video explaining the allocation and authorization of work and workloads as a manager or senior practitioner. This is a supplement to the training you have received already. Thank you for watching this video. If you have any questions at all regarding not just what this video contains, but anything regarding Eclipse, please do contact your Eclipse champions in the first instance, and they will provide as much help as they can, or they will escalate it to the Eclipse project team itself, and we will do our best to answer any questions you have. Also, please remember that there are other resources available on the intranet that we have created for you, which links should have been sent out to you when you attended your training sessions, but these can also be found on the intranet if you require. And so thank you for watching this short video focusing on the managerial aspects of Eclipse. And again, if you have any questions, please do contact your Eclipse champions in the first instance, or avail yourself of the resources the Eclipse project team have created for you and put on the intranet. So thank you and have a good day.